It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Claudia Eisenmann, Chief Executive Officer of Deaconess Gibson Hospital in Princeton, Indiana, and Deaconess Union County Hospital in Morganfield, Kentucky. Claudia has a long and diverse healthcare leadership background with C-suite appointments in organizations that vary in size from 300-bed tertiary hospitals to specialty hospitals and more recently, critical access hospitals. She has a particular expertise in turning around distressed healthcare institutions, both acute and post-acute, with an emphasis on changing culture, creating joy, and evaluating the standard of care by engaging physicians and activating teams to drive out variability, to embrace mission, and to seek benchmark performance in all areas of the operation. Claudia is a fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives and is active in both the Kentucky Hospital Association and the Indiana Rural Health Association. When she's not working, you can find Claudia somewhere outside where she enjoys restoring native wildlife habitat, fishing, and spending time on her farms. Claudia Eisenmann, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here, and the weather's starting to look better, I hope, in your part of the world. Is spring around the corner in Indiana today, or what's it?
It is, and actually, I'm at my office down in Kentucky, so it's even further south, and we are having decent weather. It's a little bit overcast, a little bit cool, but my understanding is next week is going to be in the high 70s and low 80s. So I'm very excited about that.
I can imagine. It's great to come out of winter, isn't it? Always something to look forward to.
It sure is, yes.
Well, Claudia, you've had an amazing career in the healthcare system, and wow, what a challenge it's been the last couple of years, and we'll want to talk about, the pandemic and its impact on your work. But we always like to kind of start in the beginning and, talk a little about your early family life. So tell us about where you grew up and, what your early family life was like.
So I grew up kind of in two places. So my earlier years were up in northern Ohio and kind of a small town. It's really become a bedroom community of Cleveland called Medina. And I was up there for a period of years. And, there were some things about family life that were kind of like everybody else's. I had two brothers. I'm a middle child.
Right.
And, my parents, though, didn't always get along very well with one another. And so eventually they divorced, and my mother was from Kentucky.
Oh.
And so there was a move to Kentucky when I was probably about 13 or 14, I guess.
Wow. Yeah.
And so
is that hard for you? That's a hard time to move, particularly with all the things that happen with kids at that age.
There were challenges, but I will just say this on a personal note, and for those who have been in a situation where parents divorce,
yeah.
It's easier for a kid to go into a situation where there's not fighting than to be in a situation where there is, because that chaos and uncertainty is very, very tough on kids. It makes kids feel like they got to pick sides and all that stuff.
Right.
And so it's really easier to move on and get to a place that at least feels a little bit more certain. I always had vacations in Kentucky, and my grandmother owned some farmland, and I loved the outdoors, and so I was able to kind of roam freely on that farmland property and go fishing and do all that, and that was that was really, that was my, and still is today, that's kind of my drug. You know, everybody's got their drug of choice, and, you know, and that's that is my drug of choice. I mean, it's, and I embrace it. I embrace it even today. It's really helpful to me, obviously, during the pandemic too.
Were you a good student in school growing up?
Oh my gosh, I was terrible. I was the worst ever. So, you know, I kind of marvel. I look at my career and I think about the things that you know, teachers tell their students and the things that parents sometimes tell their kids.
Right.
You know, sometimes kids, especially if they're in you know, challenging situations at home and if they're bored. In my case, I was very, very bored, so I was distracted all the time, and I was, you know, drawing pictures and stuff at my desk. So
I was challenged. That sounds to me like you were challenged. I was not challenged.
I was definitely I was an underperformer, and so I just became distracted, and I just, at that point in my life, I just thought, well, grades, you know, that's just sort of an arbitrary system somebody came up with. That doesn't mean anything. So, so there is hope. Parents, if anybody out there is a parent, there is hope for your child. So, yeah, I was an underperformer, and was really until I got into the first couple of years of college, and then I decided, you know, Claudia, you need to figure out what you want to be when you grow up and knock this off. And so I actually stayed out of college for a couple of years. I went for a year and a half, then stayed out a couple of years and just worked, and then went back part-time, and I was like, okay, I get it now. Then I was a very, very focused student, and all through graduate school and all that stuff. But I came to it late.
Yeah, well, that's okay. That's all right. Well, you made it. So back in those early days, other than the wandering outdoors, which you loved down in Kentucky, were there other things and other activities you enjoyed? Were there sports or music, theater, debate, anything like that you kind of?
I was. In fact, one of the things that really made a big, big difference for me in my career and in my life is that you wouldn't know it now, but I was actually very, very shy as a kid. And kind of scared of my own shadow. And there was a really wonderful and very inspirational teacher I had in high school. And she's passed on now, but her name was Mary Ray Oken. Wow. And Mary Ray convinced me, she was a friend of my mom's, and this was in Western Kentucky. She convinced me that I really needed to become a part of the high school speech team, to join the National Forensics League. Said, Claudia, you know, I'm telling you, I think this is going to make a difference in your life. And she was absolutely right. I did join the speech team. I was very active in speech and was successful. I learned a lot. And, you know, I mean, those presentation skills and the ability to speak in front of audiences.
Yeah.
Yes, it's carried me my entire life. So, you know, thank God for Mary Ray. She was really probably the first. She was probably the first teacher I had that really saw through all that other stuff and said, you know, really, Claudia, you've got a lot to offer, and you need to start using it.
That's fabulous. That's great. And were there competitions? Was it kind of like a debate?
Yeah. Went to tournaments and was you know, very successful at that, and couldn't believe that I actually won some tournament. I was like, how did this happen? I mean, I was so astonished. I remember this is true. So I remember one time I gave a speech and I didn't think I had done that well, you know. So I went back to the bus, took my suit off, and put on a pair of jeans and a T-shirt, and was planning on attending the speeches of my other of your colleagues. So then I go, and somebody looks at me and says, Claudia, what are you doing dressed in that? And I'm like, well, I'm just, you know, hanging out while everybody's finishing up their rounds, you know. Right. So, but you're in the finals. You're in the state finals of the. And I said, what are you talking about? So then I had to run back to the bus.
Get your seat back on.
Hey, yeah. I love it. I wound up fourth in the state. Wow. Probably if I'd have been a lot more composed, I might have got me in the top three. But
Well, that's
so,
humility. I
yeah,
love that. Well, Mary Ray
so
sounds
it
like
was
she had a huge
crazy.
impact. Were there other folks that had, kind of that level of impact on you early on? It's kind of hard to call them mentors at that stage because they truly are, but they're folks that maybe have been maybe grandparents, or was there an uncle and aunt or other people that helped to kind of, form you or lead you down that path that you eventually took
Right.
in the healthcare.
Well, there were two. First of all, my mom, both my parents have passed on. My mom passed on last year. My dad, unfortunately, he was such a great person, but he struggled with alcohol addiction, and so he
Yeah.
passed away very early in life. And that was one of the things that kind of led to the divorce of my parents. But
Yeah.
but he really was a really good person. He loved the outdoors, and I really credit my love of the outdoors with the
Yeah.
fact that, at a time when girls were sort of not allowed to be out there fishing and doing all those were kind of boy things, that my dad could have cared less, and he dragged me along to anything that I wanted to go to that was outdoors. And I'm so grateful for that, because
Yeah.
he really nurtured that. And then on my mom's side, such work ethic, such determination.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where I was kind of the shy kid and whatever. My mother could not have been more opposite. She, younger in life, she was my mom and dad met in New York City, and mom, was a hat model back in the day.
Oh, wow.
So very, very, very beautiful face, and, very photogenic and all of that. And so she was that way. And here I was this other way, very shy and, reserved. And she used to always tell me, Claudia, you've got to have some confidence. You've got to square your shoulders back and hold your head up high and know your value. And, and I've really carried that with me. I didn't always do it for a period of years, but I've carried it with me. And she worked so hard. She had her own interior design businesses after the divorce and even before the divorce and so on. So that tremendous work ethic and that determined spirit that she had, I got both of those things from my parents, or at least, set me on the path of cultivating those.
I love it. You went on to Western Kentucky University and studied psychology. Now, was that kind of planned? Did you think that's what you wanted to go and do, or like most of us went to college and try to figure it out?
I kind of some of each. I was always very, very interested in that. I'm an observer of people, and I've always known in my heart that essentially all things are about human beings and what inspires them.
Yeah.
And so I was very interested in psychology, and then really the biggest challenge I had is trying to figure out what my minor was going to be, because I was equally interested in religion, and which I almost had enough credits in to have a second minor in that, but it was really religion and spirituality, because spirituality is a big part of my life, and faith. And then the other piece was family, child and family counseling. I wound up actually minoring in child and family counseling because I thought I was going to go on and get a master's degree in counseling,
right.
And then kind of take that track. But to be blunt about it, God had a different idea than I did, and I went with that, and 30 years in healthcare, so.
So was your first job at Health South? Is that where you started your career?
No, my first job, I didn't get into healthcare until I was in my 30s.
Okay.
So
so it was after your MBA then? Did you do?
Yeah, no. I was a CEO a long time before I got my MBA. Believe it or not. Yeah, I started on my MBA, and then my career took off, and then I just never finished it.
Right.
And then finally, I thought, this is crazy. I've got to get this finished, because really, here's the thing. And this is something I tell early careerists and even mid-level careerists. The competition in these positions has changed over time, and it's pretty fierce. You need to decide that you're going to go ahead and go to the effort to complete all of the gateway credentials to get yourself to the next level.
Right.
So even though, I had been a CEO and actually was a regional CEO for Health South before they changed their name to Encompass, I knew that really where I wanted to transition to was working in acute care. I had done
Right.
everything, in the rehab side. I really wanted to go to acute care and have that experience. And I knew there were some gateway credentials for that.
Yeah.
So
What just a pause there. What led you to that decision, Claudia? What made you kind of have that affinity towards the acute care side?
well, because I had already done the
prerequisites.
rehab
Yeah,
side.
got it.
And I knew I was successful, and I just felt like I wanted to be able to have a broader understanding. I wanted to increase my scope. I still love rehab. I mean, the thing about rehab that's so wonderful is it's so hopeful for patients.
Right.
When a patient comes into a rehabilitation setting and maybe they've had a brain injury or a spinal cord injury or a stroke or something like that, and you see the look of victory on their faces and their families' faces when they take those first few steps after after being admitted. It's just something that is so heartwarming, and it's hard to put that into words. But there's another whole part of a patient's care and treatment, including the wellness aspect, that really rehab doesn't deal with.
Right.
So I really wanted to increase my scope and understand that and be a part of that as well.
Cool. Great. And then what led you to go back to get your MBA? Did you feel that you needed that? I mean, you already achieved the CEO status.
I did, but
I
started. Yeah, I started down that path, and I really believed that if I really wanted to broaden the things that I wanted to do on the general acute care side, that I was really going to need that MBA, that was a gateway credential I needed to complete.
Right.
And so I went back and completed it.
And you did that in healthcare, right? I was the MBA.
I did, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what would you say, looking back now, because it's been, 15 years or so, I think, since you completed that, what's been the biggest benefit of having that MBA as you progressed your career beyond that point?
Well, I think that, first of all education is valuable and useful. Right. I had been using some of the skills that I used in the MBA, so they were not new to me, but I was using them in a different way in my academic program. Some things, it was a great way to tune up, a skill set. The other thing is, in addition to it being a gateway degree so that people could look at my background and say, yes, you had appropriate academic preparation for us to consider you for more responsibility. It really helps refine and tune up your critical thinking skills, I think. It helps you develop a method of thought and problem solving. And so, when people a lot of times say, well, if you're in the C-suite already, what would be the value of going on and getting that degree? I mean, really, it's twofold. One is you are still going to gain a lot of you're going to really improve your skill set. Because sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you go back and you take these courses and you get into more detail. And then the other piece of that is you don't want not having a degree to be a barrier to opportunity.
Of course. Yeah.
So, both of those are factors.
Yeah. Cool. Great. And so coming out of the MBA, did you go back to the same company or did you move on to greener pastures, so to speak?
Yeah, really, while I was getting my MBA, I was working for Christus Health. I was down in Northeast Texas. Loved Christus. Loved that job. It was really terrific. One of my mentors and really the whole team that I worked with down there, we were all C-suite people. It was just such a remarkable and wonderful group. We all had terrific energy and worked together. But there were some family things going on in my life. My mom and my stepdad were back in Kentucky. My stepfather had just been diagnosed with melanoma, and there was a hospital that needed a CEO, a small hospital. And so they reached out to me and offered me the position, and I decided to accept it and left at that point. And I think I actually got the degree conferred right after I left and joined them.
Yeah, awesome, cool. And what was it like growing up in kind of the C-suite in healthcare at that time? Was it a pretty balanced gender management team at the time, or was it still pretty much a man's world? I know that that's transformed over time, but what was it like during the period you were coming through?
There were not a lot of women in the
Yeah.
C-suite. And it's so funny because I was reflecting on this recently about how this dynamic has shifted and changed. It's still not perfect, but it's,
No.
the glass ceilings are not in the same place that they
That's
used
right.
to be.
Yeah.
There are many women and not just women, but there are also people of color. And I think it's important that in
Yes.
healthcare, we embrace that leaders don't look necessarily like this traditional sort of male in the three-piece suit that's white
Yes.
kind of way anymore.
Right.
And
Right.
so as that has broadened, I think it just adds a dimension, a very important dimension
Of course. Yeah.
into what we do in healthcare, because healthcare is a service.
Right.
I'm in healthcare because of my need to embrace mission in my own life. And I think, the way that we reach out into our communities when we're leaders in the healthcare environment, and this includes our boards,
Right.
it's so important that we represent every member of our community. So whether they're women, whether those community members are African American, whether there are other minorities that we represent in our communities, we should have boards and C-suites that look like they look.
Represent. Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
and we should have employees in our organization that also
Right.
look like that. So
Right.
we've come a long way, because I can tell you about some conversations that I had heard and was a part of early on in my career that now, there would be some guys that would get
There'd be
fired
sexual
for saying
harassment.
stuff like that. Yeah.
I can imagine.
People, it's just,
It's changed so much.
just really, I laugh to myself because I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, things have really, really changed. And back in the day, if you were a female and you were listening to these conversations, if you wanted to keep your job, you needed to remain silent.
You kept your mouth shut. Yeah. Yeah.
You did. You kept your mouth shut.
Right, right. Well, I'm glad those things have changed. And as you said, there still is a lot of change that needs to take place, but we are making progress. I'd like to talk a little bit about your leadership shifting and, kind of how that maybe changed over the years as you grew and, obviously wisdom as well as experience and
Yeah.
spending as many, years as you've had in the healthcare system. What would you say as kind of some of the biggest shifts you went through from those early days, maybe pre-MBA, obviously, to now kind of how you run and work with folks in your organization?
So there's really a couple of things I think that really come to mind. I mean, one of the main things that comes to mind is, and even in an MBA program, there is a real emphasis on being competent in your role.
Right.
Without necessarily the same amount of emphasis on relationships.
Mm.
So if you are going to be successful across time in your career, you do need to be competent, but you must be able to build affirming, trusting relationships as you go.
Right.
And I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned along this journey is that you have to have balance with that.
Yeah.
And the number one foundational element of anything that we do in leadership is about people. It's
Right.
about forming trusting relationships with groups of people that we call teams, and making sure those teams have the tools and the equipment that they need. And that includes education. That includes, again, hiring the right people.
Yep.
Getting them on the right seats of the bus, as Jim Collins said many years ago. And
give them the right support. Yeah.
Give them the right support that they need. Don't micromanage them too much,
Right.
because you micromanage them, you're going to deprive people of the opportunity and thus the value of making their own mistakes and learning from them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So learning how to do that and maintaining relationships and having some boundaries in those relationships. Because I think as a young leader, it's very hard to know where those boundaries are supposed to be.
That's right.
So learning all of that and having that in place, and then having high expectations of people. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being the high expectation CEO. In fact, you should be. Because you're not going to be able to get your organization to the next level if you don't have high expectations of people. But again, you got to have people in the right place. People need to trust you. You need to be able to communicate mission and passion. We can't be passionless about our job. And again, if you just take a straight up MBA, there's nothing in an MBA that says you have to go out there with emotion and passion. But people do need to see you that way as a leader.
That's right.
If it's not important to you as a leader, it's not going to be important to anybody else.
That's right.
So, finding that balance and being able to grow into that, and really, really valuing people and having a sense of humility. If there's anything that's ever been achieved for any leader along the way, it's not about them. It's about their ability to inspire an entire network of individuals. And in the healthcare setting, that includes physicians, because they're so critical to every part of what we do.
And their personalities aren't necessarily, they're not trained in the same kind of business management either, right?
No, they're right. That's exactly right. Yeah. So I think I evolved from a person who thought, well, if you just perform, if you have if the outcomes are there, then everything's good. To understanding, no, you have to be able to have these connections with people. And again, inspiration, it's not about managing people, and it's not about motivating people. It's about people becoming inspired inside themselves to want to do something. And it takes a bit of time to kind of learn how to do that. And then, again, being a leader who's willing to say you're sorry, I think that's important. We mess up. We're just humans.
That humility, right?
Recognizing that none of us accomplishes anything without somebody helping us along the way, recognizing, acknowledging those people, helping them in their careers. So all those are really, really important things.
Yeah. We spoke a few weeks ago, and you talked about the importance of faith, and you briefly mentioned that a little earlier today. When have you come, tell us about a time when you've come to really had to go to your faith and help you through a really difficult business situation. Can you remember one or two of those?
Oh, I do. Probably the toughest, there have been several tough challenges because, somehow along the way, I sort of got sort of pointed in the direction of working with distressed hospitals. So when you're a person that goes in and you're in a place where that really does need to be turned around, you're usually dealing with cultural issues and a lot of other things that have contributed to that organization's either struggling or failing. And sometimes when you go in as the agent of change, the situation can become rather volatile because, you just can't know what's really happening there until you go in and you begin to talk to people and you begin to do some hard analysis on, kind of what's happening and so forth. And I had a situation that I had just gotten to a place, the hospital was actually doing okay financially, but what happened when I got there is was brought to my attention by the nursing staff and by the director of quality in the hospital that there were some very, very serious issues with some members of the medical staff, some safety issues and so forth. And from a risk management viewpoint, and just from an ethical, from an ethical viewpoint, those things had to be investigated. So, this was it really kind of launched me down a rabbit hole that I didn't really want to go down after only having been in a place a couple of months, because I didn't have strong enough relationships there
Sure.
to be embedded in the culture yet. So that became a very, very challenging situation, and I was really committed to staying the course, identifying what was going on with these medical staff issues, working with the board and with members of the medical staff who also wanted to get to the truth. There were other members of the medical staff who just wanted to circle the wagons, and they became very volatile, and they got, and they brought community members in, and it really it got pretty challenging. But what was so interesting about that from a standpoint of faith is, when you're hearing people openly, defame you in public meetings and do all of this stuff, the tendency I think that all people have is to take a defensive posture.
Of course, sure.
And even though that was very, very hard, I was so at peace with the work. And I was at peace with the work because I knew that God would not have put me in that situation if He wasn't going to get me through it. And that's what happened.
Well, put you in the situation because there was something you had to learn through it, right?
Yeah, there were things to learn. There were also things that needed to be exposed. And I think the faith that I have is the thing that reminds me over and over that, we have an assignment when we get to this life.
Yeah.
And whatever that assignment is, if you do everything you're supposed to do and rely on God for the rest, you will have everything that you need given to you at exactly the right time, so that you will be able to fulfill that assignment and make the world better because of your presence here.
Yeah.
And that is something that I believe every single day.
Yeah. Takes a while to learn that. It took me a while to learn that, but you're absolutely right.
It does. Because when you're getting beat up, you think, well, God can't love me if if these bad things are happening to me or whatever. Right. But the reality is, God never promises that we will not experience adversity.
That's right.
and barriers and obstacles. What He says is, if you will keep your focus on me, and you will trust me, I will equip you with everything you need to get you through this.
Yeah,
and you will come out of this bad experience having been transformed in ways that you would not have believed that you could be transformed.
Yeah, amen.
And
if you haven't become transformed, that things keep coming back again and again until you get it right.
They do. That's exactly right. Yeah. So why repeat them? If they're really uncomfortable, let's just do it once.
Let's just do it once, God.
Let's just do it once. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about Deaconess Health. You've been there coming up on 4 years, and obviously as the President Chief Executive Officer of the systems that you're over, and then of course the bigger Union County Hospitals relationship you have. But just give us a little bit of a footprint of your organization, how many people, how many hospitals, and tell us a little bit about your business.
The Deaconess Health System is just really such a terrific regional health system. We're an independent regional health system. There aren't that many of those anymore in this era of consolidation. Right. Based in Evansville, Indiana, 2 tertiary hospitals up there, plus an ortho-neuro hospital, women's hospital. We have some joint ventures that we have with other folks. We talked about Health South, whose name is Encompass. We're a partner with them in their hospital in the marketplace. We also have a hospital over in Henderson, Kentucky. The 2 hospitals that I take care of, which are critical access hospitals. Deaconess has just really started moving into rural health care, but it is to give you a sense, it's a $4.5 billion system. It is, we've been very, very successful, and that's
how many employees and how many locations?
About 9,100 employees.
Wow.
Total across the system.
Yeah.
And I probably take care of about, 500 or so. We've got directly and then indirectly through other things. We have a lot of matrixed relationships in this system, and then I work with others, and then we have quite a big physician enterprise as well, with roughly 700 providers. About half of those are doctors, the other half are APPs, and then a variety of other relationships, obviously, with independent groups and so on. And so it's a strong, vibrant system. It's really just such a terrific group of people, and I'm honored and proud to work with them.
These last 2 years has put our entire world, and certainly our nation, healthcare system, through some really incredibly trying times. And I have so much empathy and humility when I think about getting choked up, the frontline workers and how they've really just borne the brunt of so much of the issues around, dealing with the sick, and how wonderful, those situations have been. And I would just love to hear a little bit of a reflection from you in looking at these past couple of years. And, what are some of the key learnings that you'd like to share with some of us that aren't involved in the healthcare system, and, help us help you in a way of how we should be thinking about this moving forward. And, who knows if this will ever happen again, God forbid, but there's been a reason we've gone through it, but boy, I'll tell you, I have, for one, have had such a greater appreciation for those that are in the service that you folks do, and help us understand both, I think, some of the impact that it's had, and how can we as non-healthcare providers, right, but users of the system, be better in terms of helping, this system do better in the future.
I think probably the first thing that I would lead with is to say that most people who work inside of healthcare and have had this experience directly for the last 2 years, you're going to find that a lot of those people don't share a lot about it to those who are not in healthcare. And the reason why is because it would be impossible for a person who has not lived this inside of healthcare day in and day out to believe what really happened.
It's like going through a war, isn't it? I mean, it is very much
the same, and that's just why those veterans from World War II never talked about the war when they got back, because there's and I mean there's this. I think there is this tendency for people to want to minimize what somebody's experience is, because they just can't relate to it.
Can't relate.
So people just don't talk about it. So the first takeaway is my coworkers in healthcare, the nurses, the respiratory therapists, the direct caregivers, the physicians, the nurse practitioners, are so heroic that there's not a single word that I can say to talk about, or that would even begin to touch my gratitude for these people. The way they came in every day, and in the early phases, it is courage. In the early phases of this pandemic, remember, we didn't know really how to treat it. We had no treatment methods. We didn't know what it was. We had our own staff catching this disease and dying, and then taking it home to their families and their family members dying. I mean, in my own emergency department, here in the hospital in Morganfield, Kentucky, we lost a member of our emergency department and her husband within a week of one another.
Oh my God!
And now they did not get the vaccine. I will say that sometimes in rural America, people are a little suspicious of things that the government suggests we need, but. It's very unfortunate how politicized the whole vaccine issue became, because I think people lost their lives that didn't have to. But still, these people came in every day not knowing what the outcome would be for them, and that is fundamentally a level of mission and service that is really hard for other people to be able to relate to. But so my respect for these people and my love for them is something that I could never be able to adequately communicate. So that's first. The next thing that I would say is it's really important, I think, that every single person right now, whether you're in healthcare or not in healthcare, realize that folks that you're going to be interacting with as we try to come out of the worst of the pandemic is probably suffering in some way. So be kind, be a little bit more gentle with people, because people are incredibly fragile right now. We've, in a 24-hour period, just a couple of weeks ago, I lost 2 spouses of employees to suicide.
Oh, goodness.
And, that was a shock to me, but it reinforced that there are people suffering as a result of this in ways that we take for granted. We think they're not.
It's trauma, Claudia.
Absolutely. People are tremendously traumatized. I think about, again, there are people who have lost, through death. They've lost people in COVID. But COVID also clarified a lot of other relationships. I mean, there are friendships between the political environment we're in right now and COVID, and the fact that there was so much isolation going on. It really teased out and clarified relationships. So people lost friendships because they couldn't interact in the normal way. There was a lot of loss during this time, and it is going to take a period of time, I think, for people to get through this. So,
full recovery,
it's a really good time to just have empathy for other people.
Have that empathy.
Let them have a bad day. So many have a bad day and they say something ugly to you. Just it's okay. Fine.
And be respectful the next time you go into a healthcare situation, whether that's your own doctor or a clinic, and bless the people that are.
Say thank you for your work. Thank you for being here for us during this time. I thank my coworkers in healthcare all the time, because what they did, it was truly heroic. It was truly courageous.
Well,
and nobody got into healthcare thinking. Nobody got into healthcare thinking, "Oh, please don't thank me." It is absolutely not about me. It's about those people that stood there at the bedside, because they were the people standing in the gap.
Your leadership of them counts too, Claudia, and that's incredibly important. And
what counts is how much I care about them. And if I'm able to communicate that to them, and that is what they see in me, then I feel like that's the job that I want to do.
Well, thank you for sharing that with our listeners. I know that'll mean a lot to the folks that listen to this. And we're getting close to running out of time, but we always have a couple last questions we ask, and kind of related to this, what do you look for when you're making bets on the people you invest in and hire into your organization?
What I want to know is I'm most interested in fit. If somebody actually gets to me for an interview, they're probably competent. I don't have to try to figure out whether or not they know the fundamentals of their job. That's not it. What I'm interested in is fit. So, and that's all about values. So do the values of that individual align with the values that we are trying to create in our organization and that we honor in our organization? Because culture and values really drives everything else. And that's what keeps your mission on track, is hiring people that have that level of belief. And that's where inspiration comes from. It comes from that inner belief, but you can't take people who don't match your values and try to mesh them in your organization just because they're competent. So, what I'm always trying to get a sense of is, hey, what's most important to you as a candidate? And I ask that. The 2 questions that I always try to ask are, one, if you join the organization, tell me a little bit about what your first 90 to 120 days looks like. And I just leave it very open-ended, because you can tell whether or not people value people, because they'll talk about getting to know people, or they won't. You'll hear about that. And then the other thing that's always a very telling question is, and I ask this, I say, so I want you to project forwardly in your career, and at the time that you are about to retire, or look across your career and tell me what is the most important accomplishment from your work, from your entire body of work? What does that look like to you? Give me a picture of that. Wow. And you will really, really learn. That really quickly distills out what some of these values are.
Yeah, awesome. Great. Last question, we ask this of all our guests is, what kind of career and life advice would you give someone that maybe has their eye on the corner office or a senior level position, particularly in the healthcare industry? What's important for them to think about today if they're mid-career?
So I think that if you're in the healthcare industry and you're trying to figure out how to get to that next level, first of all, do some reflection. Figure out how to be authentic. And nobody likes a phony. People can see through that. And I think a lot of times people think they have to match what somebody else is. But you're never going to be good at being somebody else. You need to take the things that you have as a leader that are your gifts, because everybody has their own gifts. Yep. And you need to figure out how to be authentically you and optimize those gifts. At the same time, have an awareness of the things that you're not as good at, and figure out how you can improve in those areas. And also surround yourself with people who maybe have strengths that you don't have. Yeah. And think about building a team around a host of different diverse skill sets and gifts, because that's how you get that. And the other thing that I would say is, there's two other things. First of all, cultivate curiosity. Be a reader. Ask a lot of questions. Right. Don't sit back. Just because you're out of school doesn't mean your brain should get turned off.
You stop learning. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really, curiosity is such an important attribute of good leaders. And so cultivate
at any point in your career.
Ask yourself, at any point in your career, cultivate it. You're always going to be learning, and so read a lot of books and diverse books and diverse views that sometimes conflict with you. Learn that humility and caring for others, including forgiveness. If you're a person and you're in midway in your career and you've messed up somewhere, learn from that experience, but forgive yourself for it, make it right. And then move on. Learn and move on. Don't get stuck on a page. Don't get stuck in that moment and think that, this is the worst thing that ever happened, because it's probably not. And the same thing is true of people that you lead. Right. Let them make their mistakes. Yeah,
that's how we learn.
And then help them. Then help them get through it. I mean, these are important things in leadership, but when you begin to practice these things, and I use the word practice because it's not a one-time thing, you have to practice authenticity. You have to practice curiosity. You have to practice humility. You have to practice doing good every day, being a generous person with your time and the words you say, etc. Do that every day. And make a practice out of that. And you know what? People are going to see that. And then you're going to have these opportunities open for you, because the universe just plain works that way.
That's right. So wise. Claudia Eisenmann, President and Chief Executive Officer in the Deaconess Health System, thank you so very much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thanks so much for having me. I've really enjoyed our time today.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.